In this new episode of Expat Experts, I'm thrilled to be joined by Neil Laird. Neil is an award-winning documentary TV producer with over 25 years of experience working with National Geographic, BBC, Discovery, PBS, and much more. He has traveled over 70 countries exploring lost cities, ancient cultures, and recently he has ventured and moved from producing TV to fiction, writing her own novels of time traveling adventure series in Egypt, Italy, and Turkey. In this episode, we will explore Neil's expat experience in Egypt and how his travels has informed and affected his filmmaking and his writing.
This is Expat Experts, the podcast that dives into the fascinating lives of those who've lived and worked across borders, exploring the challenges, experiences, and insights they've gained along the way.
But before we start with the episode, I want to remind to all listeners that the best way to stay tuned with the latest episodes is by hitting subscribe here on YouTube and in your favorite audio platform. For extra information about the podcast, check the website expatexpertspodcast.com or check the link in the description.
The Expat, Neil Laird.
So, first of all, thanks again, Neil, for joining the episode today. I really appreciate having you here.
No, my pleasure. It's a great podcast and great subject, so I'm happy to jump in.
Thank you. Actually, like the first part, I want to talk a little bit about your whole experience, like living abroad, traveling. I know that you backpack quite a lot. You've visited over 70 countries, as far as I recall. You lived in Egypt. You lived for some time also in Turkey, back and forward between the US. You're originally from US, really?
Correct.
Is it?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
From which part of America?
Small town in western Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. So another reason why one wants to see the world when you live in Western PA.
But you traveled more than 70 countries. That's said really fast, but it's done very in a long time, I suppose. How this?
Yeah. It wasn't all in a summer. It was exactly like the Red Eye Express. It took about 35 years before I checked those boxes. Yeah.
Can imagine. When did you start traveling? Like when that happened?
It was, again, I grew up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, which, is pretty much a nowheresville. But I've always been fascinated into movie making. And even as a kid, I would watch all the epic movies, particularly the Kurosawa movies that took me across the world. And I always loved history, and I always loved just exotic locations. But I didn't really get a chance to do much as a kid. Growing up a middle-class kid, we would do our holidays to the beach in Jersey and that kind of stuff, which was lovely. But it was only after I got to film school, I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I thought I would do the narrative route, that I would become, make narrative films and write scripts and stuff, which a lot of kids want to do. And I went to film school for it, and I had my degree in hand and moved to New York City, thinking I would become Martin Scorsese overnight. And that did not happen, as is most the case. So I spent a lot of time just sort of like sitting around waiting for the phone not to ring and having a lot of time on my hands. So one day, for some reason, it was a really hot New York summer. I can still remember this. I had like $6 in my pocket, and I needed a cool air-conditioned place to hang out for a while. And I went to the New York Public Library because it's free. And for whatever reason, I'm perusing the aisles, and I come across this old tattered book about the rise of early civilization. About Neolithic man and cave art in France and that kind of stuff. And I'd never got that kind. I went to a small Catholic school in Pennsylvania, so I never got that kind of historical or international education. So I picked the book up, and a penny dropped. I became absolutely fascinated with ancient history and what I didn't learn. So I resolved to teach myself, while I waited for the phone to ring, history through the New York Public Library. And then I got to the Middle East, and I got to ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, Greco-Roman cultures, and I became enamored of that world. Something about it just absolutely called to me. So I said, to hell with waiting for this phone not to ring. I scraped together a few bucks I had, and I backpacked to the Middle East. This was maybe I was 21 or something like that. So I was old enough to kind of understand the machinations of travel. But this was in the early 90s, where, except for a Lonely Planet, You did not have the internet, and you did not have all this stuff. I'm sure we can talk deep how much travel has changed. But I just lost myself in that world. So I went to Syria, Turkey, Iran, Egypt, Iran, and Israel. And eventually the money ran out, and I came back and I said, well, how can I get someone to take me back there and pay for it? Then I went back to school and became a documentary filmmaker, which we'll talk about later. But essentially, that's how I got into it. I just became so fascinated, particularly with the Middle East and the ancient world, that I just knew it was my calling. I knew how to get back there somehow over and over again. And that's pretty much what I've been doing ad nauseum since 1991.
Nice. I mean, seems like you find a passion due to a hot summer, and then went to probably the hottest another hot region.
I'm a glutton for punishment. I was in these places. It was July and August, I think, of 91, 92, something like that. When it was just friggin' sweltering. But that's when it was offered. I went with a friend of mine who was a school teacher. And the only time he has off is the summer months when the kids aren't in school. So to have a travel mate, that was the time I did it. Now, I stayed much longer than him. I stayed into the fall and kept going into Iran and keep going east and east and east. And I only came back because I ran out of cash. But I could still be wandering around Afghanistan by now. Who knows if I had more cash? Who knows how far I would have gotten?
That's a typical thing, no? But it's very cool that you were like passionate enough to just grab your bag, some stuff, put it inside, and just go for it, like as long as you can. And then it's not that you were going like I can imagine that for you it was also a shock when you arrived there, because okay, reading some stuff, it's okay, you can imagine some things, but when you're there in reality, and especially the difference between United States and Middle East, it's huge. It's not that you're going to France, I don't know, like
I lived in London. I went to school in London, so I knew Western Europe. It wasn't the first time I'd been abroad, but Western Europe, like the U.S., is a very different environment. London is home. France and those places are very much like it. But you're plopping your butt down in Cairo. You're plopping your butt down in Damascus, and you are definitely off the beaten path, and you're out of your comfort zone. And I think that's what I was chasing. I remember there was a glorious moment. I think it was in eastern Turkey, and I was working my way towards Iran. And this was after a couple months of travel. And I realized that except for my passport home, my travel ticket home, I was sort of a nomad. No one knew where I was. No one could contact me. Again, this is before cell phones. I was just totally, absolutely free. I was just floating on my own. And I've been chasing that high ever since.
Nice.
And I recognized how free I was. And, you can't step back in the same river twice. When you go back to a place, things are different. Now you have experiences. Now you're a little more knowledgeable. But I was this naive kid just drifting east. And boy, I've been trying to put that in a bottle ever since.
One of the things that you already posed, and I wanted to ask you, it's also like you start traveling in a moment that, as you said, like Lonely Planet, it's still there. You still have the book guides. A lot of people doesn't use them anymore. No, you have like you can even have SIMs in any country and have internet on your phone everywhere and connection. How did your family react? This is also something that it's curious to me. Like, okay, I'm leaving, and then suddenly.
I don't think that. First of all, I didn't know I was going to be gone so long. If I was going to be, originally it was a buddy of mine, because I was really into Egypt at that point. I still am. Egypt is my muse. I've written books about it. I've made over 50, 60 films. I've been back to Egypt a couple dozen times, 30 or 40 times. I don't know how many times since then. So it's always been my place. So he wanted to go to Israel because he's Jewish. And I said, if you tack on 2 weeks holiday in Egypt, I'll go with you. And even the family was worried about this. Mind you, this is right after the first Gulf War. So this is 92, I suppose. So, people don't know exactly what to think of the Arab world. But it was a packaged vacation to Egypt, and Israel was fairly safe. Then I started getting really off the beaten path. And my parents, of course, didn't know about it. They didn't know it was in Syria and Jordan and Iran, because those places clearly were on a more terrifying list. I think I called home a couple times a month or something. I don't forget even how I even did it back then. Were there cyber cafes yet? I don't think there was, because I don't think it was a digital world yet. I think I must have gone into a post office or something, and at great expense had a 2-minute call to my parents back here in Pennsylvania and said, yeah, I'm in Tehran. I'm fine. Click.
Yeah, of course. It's also expensive. It's not only the matter of like whatever. Back then, calling, like now it's also actually calling, it's maybe the thing that probably it's still very expensive to call internationally. You do it through WhatsApp and you do it through online channels or like internet, but calling in a
Yeah,
normal
and that's how it's all
phone.
done now. Like, I mean, it's all free now, where none of
Yeah.
that stuff existed. And I remember even the Lonely Planet. I had done my research and I got my Lonely Planet Egypt, but I remember like the reason I even went to Jordan was because I think I was in Damascus or somewhere, and a friend had a Lonely Planet Jordan, and on the cover was Petra. I said, "What the fuck is that? Oh, I want to see that." So, knowing nothing about it, I just looked at a cover of a book and said that was enough for me to research and go on. Now, of course, you could sit there no matter where you are and wherever, and you could Google all you wanted to about Petra, how much tickets are, what time it opens, and the best hotels. I just took a bus to the Allenby Bridge and went to Jordan and see what happened once I got over there, and it was great. And my God, those are the most informative years of my life doing that stuff. And I did it again through Southeast Asia and South America and stuff. But that first one, as you probably know, is the most courageous and the one that sticks the most, because that's when you really have to force yourself out of your own comfort zone, as I said, and recognize that it's just you figuring this stuff out. You have to trust the people. You got to trust your instincts, and you got to let go. You have to let go and recognize you're in somebody else's time, somebody else's culture. If the bus doesn't come for 12 hours, and the bus doesn't come for 12 hours, you find something else to do. You buy a watermelon and you sit in the park.
I mean, there is people who would be extremely scared, like also like what you said, no, you arrive there, everything is different, you don't know much at that point of time. You need to go with the flow, and that's something that either you are made for it or you are not. And
Yes, look,
that's the
it's not for
reality.
everybody. Obviously, people listening here, I can well imagine they're expats. They already gotten over the fear, or they've embraced the challenges. And after a while, it stops becoming a fear. Other people I recognize where they would say, why would I want to do that to myself? Why do I want to go through that additional stress? I'm happy here in Los Angeles or London or wherever you are. I don't need
Mm.
it. I don't place value. I do for myself, but I don't place value judgment on other people if they don't feel that kind of travel, particularly hard scrabble travel in the backpacker back of the day. It's not for everybody, and it shouldn't be.
Mm.
Not easy. And I got dysentery 3 or 4 times, and I didn't get arrested until I started making films. We can talk about that later. I was perfectly safe. They were wonderful people. So only when I showed up with film cameras is when I started getting in
Yeah,
trouble.
people get scared, eh?
Yeah, yeah,
I can imagine. Uh, One thing that I also wanted to ask you, because you were saying also like you when you start traveling, there was no phones. You were calling like 2 minutes home maximum, and that
yeah,
was the whole back and forward that you had with home. So, um, what has changed? You continued traveling for 35 years, and now probably you also have a smartphone and you can connect with everything very fast, and you could. But sometimes I wonder if back then you were needed and forced to connect more with the local people and get it much more in contact with people when traveling or living abroad, because mm, either you do it or you die, like,
yeah.
or you don't survive.
You have to. I think. I remember some wonderful conversations I had with. I was in Jordan, I think, and I was like waiting for a bus or something. It never came. And I started hanging out with these chickpea farmers who were sitting by the side of the road, and they invited me over for tea. And of course, they spoke no English, and I spoke no Arabic, except from a Lonely Planet where I pulled out a book and showed where where I lived, New York City. That
Mm,
was the only reference point. But we sat there and we talked for hours and hours. No one pulled out a phone. There was no Google Translate. It was just somehow we communicated. Now, of course, it was rudimentary communication. We weren't getting into deep thoughts, but it was a substantive conversation I wouldn't have had today, I think. Because by now we would have got an Uber, or they'd be on their phone, or somehow there'd be something between us that could make it either easier through Google Translate, or we could get out of there sooner. So
mm,
having those long waits and things and being forced, quote unquote, to talk to people brought out such wonderful conversations you wouldn't have otherwise. Now, I remember a couple years later, one of my next trips was I went to Southeast Asia, and on my own, I went to Burma, Myanmar, and that place was really kind of difficult to get to. And again, that was a bit rougher because it was sort of closed off politically. But I remember sitting there on my own, and all I had was whatever paperback I did. But I met so many people because nobody was looking down at their phone. They would
Mm.
see a stranger, they would see a single traveler over there, and it was always being invited over because I was sitting there alone.
Yeah.
So you kind of, when you have no other distractions, invariably you look around you and you work with the world that's in front of you. So I met so many lifelong friends that way that I probably wouldn't have if I had my nose buried and I was reading the New York Times.
Absolutely, absolutely, and not only that. I think there is a whole fact of, I don't know. I'm from a generation that, not directly from kid, but at some point we start growing up already with smartphones and everything. It's like digital, and we embrace it so fast, so early. And I don't know. I feel sometimes like, if someone, like, it's a matter of trust also, or like of discomfort. When you are traveling around and you don't have a phone because, I don't know, you don't have internet and you're not looking, and someone is saying, hey, come here, we invite you to tea. I don't know if a lot of people from my generation will feel scared, actually, more than well invited. And I'm generalizing, of course, like, of course there is a lot of people, but we have also this sensation of like being scared of a lot of things, or the
Yeah.
human interaction part, at least.
Yeah, exactly. Or questioning, certainly, I think, with Americans in the Middle East, particularly, or even anywhere, it's kind of like you question people. And it's easy to scare
Mm.
yourself, as you would anything. You get a diagnosis, you have a headache, and invariably you start Googling and you have brain cancer, because all roads lead to the worst possible thing. That's the danger of the
Yes.
rabbit hole of it. If you Google what is life like in downtown Cairo, invariably you'll come across some crime statistic that will scare the shit out of you. We always look for the worst. If you have no knowledge, you accept the people on good faith. And, again, that's how I met these wonderful people, stayed at people's houses when I got stuck. And, when the train didn't arrive or whatever, or just other tourists that I met along the way. And I may not have taken those risks if I had known more, quote unquote.
Mm.
Naivete is a wonderful thing.
Yeah,
To a
cool.
degree.
Certain point, eh?
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Education is
What?
good too. You should definitely do a little bit
Yeah.
of research.
You said that you went back, actually, like after running out of money, and then it's when you studied documentary
Yeah.
filmmaking. Um, I suppose that took some years of studies, and then you start traveling again. But was that also like you start traveling for doing documentaries at that point? It was already that thing, or like, how do you divide traveling for doing documentaries versus traveling for pleasure and
Well, I still do travel for pleasure, but now I'm in my late 50s. So, now I do want a comfortable bed and I'm okay to, to
Mhm.
get the Uber. And, I like the creature comforts a little more than I did when I was, a man half my age. But yeah, there was a great divide. When I came back from that trip, I guess 8 or 9 months, I forget how long I was gone. I resolved to somehow, as I say, get in this business and come back and have somebody else pay the dime. Or, and it's less cynical, I just love the culture. I met archaeologists and I met stonemasons and these local peoples along the way, and I want to tell their stories. So I went back to grad school for filmmaking, but this time documentary. And one of the people that I had met in Cairo was a friend of mine whose father was on the antiquities board. And I kept relations with him. And then for my thesis film for my graduate school in Chicago, I did a documentary about the Great Sphinx of Egypt, the restoration of the Great Sphinx, because my friend's father was on the board and he was able to get me free permits. It's quite expensive, as you can imagine, to shoot, and particularly in places like Egypt and Pompeii and some of the real expensive, real popular tourist sites. I did it all for free on a cheap visa. So I went over there and I made my graduate film with the student cameras that shouldn't have been taken out of Chicago. I took them to the Giza Plateau for like a month. Never did tell him that. And I made my film about the Great Sphinx, and we talked a bit about why I love Cairo, why I went back there and lived for a while, why I love it so much. When I got over there, I very early realized, for me anyways, the story was not the Egyptologists and archaeologists, as great as they were. My story became the stonemasons who were building the Sphinx, restoring it. So context-wise, in the late 90s, the Sphinx was falling apart. And if you've been to the Great Sphinx, one of the things you might be surprised to see is that it's carved in the living rock, but has a bunch of cladding stone around it. which actually goes back to antiquity. The New Kingdom, they put it up, and then it fell apart. Greco-Roman times, Ottoman times, they kept trying to restore it. Well, it was falling off again in the 90s, and largely because they had a really bad botch job, and it got some Italian engineers to come and then use modern day cement in the late 80s. And the thing just, it's like the Sphinx shedding an unwanted skin. It was just pushing these blocks out, and it was crumbling and falling apart. So they tried to figure out, how are we going to save this 4,500-year-old? It's the Sphinx, it's the oldest statue in the world. It's iconic. So they went back to the original methods that they believe the pharaonic stonemasons did, just using sand and lime. And they carved everything to hand. They used the same stones and the same quarries the pharaohs did. And they hired local masons, all guys from Cairo. There was no Westerners involved at all. And that became my story. I realized that was far more interesting than talking to some Oxford or Yale expert about what they think the Sphinx was. We had those people in there. But to me, the story was these modest, wonderful Egyptians who just lived and breathed this culture. And they're the ones who restored the Sphinx. So I followed with them. I got up every morning and went to follow them from their trucks in East Cairo all the way to the Sphinx, and got to know them very, very well. And I think I was able to create a story out of that no one else had. So I was able to sell that to the Discovery Channel. My thesis film was actually sold to the network, which is a big thing back in the day. And I've been doing it ever since. Because I was able to sell my first film to network television, I skipped a bunch of steps and went right into producing. Yeah. And that's pretty much what I've been doing since 97.
Nice. Very cool. And I assume Egypt has been the place that you've been back and forward the most times. You not only to the documentaries, because you also generated relations in there and you met people, but also probably because it attracts you, the lifestyle and the way of doing of Cairo, for example. How is living in Cairo? I suppose it's so many years that it has changed so much, probably, that it's difficult to say. But
and you get nostalgic for the old days. But I remember, I'm so glad I did it. One of those first trips to Egypt, I was probably shooting the Sphinx or doing a recon for the Sphinx, a scouting. And I had a day or two, so I just walked across Cairo. It's just like a 7-hour walk, whatever. I walked to East Cairo. So, the pyramids and such on the west side by the Nile. And then where my friend's family was staying, and they're upper class, and that's a nice area. And I just wanted to see old Islamic Cairo. So rather than taking a crowded bus or a cab, and, Cairo is one of the most polluted and crowded cities on the planet, I just started walking. And I walked it all the way there and went through all these neighborhoods. And I mention it now because most of those neighborhoods are gone. This was 30 years ago, so things changed in then. But I'm so glad I had that experience of what Cairo was like from beginning to end, from East Cairo to West Cairo. Because if I look at it today, it's just ugly tower blocks, or old Islamic architecture is taken down. There's byways and highways. Invariably, like New York City or London or Athens, cities change, no matter how old they are. So the city today doesn't have quite that absolute wonderful, exotic, moldering charm it did, because time marches on. So I'm glad I saw it. But yeah, I would like to have gone. I wish I recorded more of it. I wish I'd gone back and visited more times then. One of my favorite areas was where the stonemasons lived, and I got a chance to spend time out there. It's a place called the City of the Dead. Have you been to Cairo?
No, not yet.
You've been to Cairo?
No.
City of the Dead.
I want to go.
Oh, yeah.
Planning to go next year, actually. So,
all my stories hopefully will inspire you. There's an area of Cairo called the City of the Dead, and they call it that because that was all where the Islamic mausoleums were built in the heyday of the 12th, 13th century AD. So all the rich people from those periods would have huge mausoleums, and hundreds of them, just on the edge of the desert. And then over time, of course, overcrowded Cairo, those became housing for the poor. The bodies were taken out. Entire families moved in, including Saeed al-Nashashi, this lead stonemason who I followed on my show. So I went to visit him after the shoot wrapped, and I'm walking around this beautiful area of all this, again, moldering architecture. But they're all just tombs, but there were families living in it, and they had took great care. They had little gardens out back, and they have very house proud. And it's all been destroyed. It's all been taken down the last 10
Yeah.
years. There's probably a bulldozer knocking down one of the last mausoleums as we speak because they need housing, and now, ugly cement concrete's going up instead. That whole area is gone forever. And it's probably healthy. There was no plumbing, and it definitely had its major drawbacks
Yeah, I can imagine,
because
but at the same time, it has
sanitation,
history,
sanitation.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the biggest problem right now, no? Like the whole destruction also of places versus conservation and modernization of the things. It's just like you lose the history in sake of like, okay, fitting more people into a city. Great. Uh, not the biggest fan, but but I can imagine that at, in countries like Egypt, these things are done rather quick, and it's just like, okay, we need space, and then building houses, and then they don't really care too much
They
about.
have so much archaeology, most ancient stuff that it's kind of like, here in America, if there's a house from 1870, we preserve it because one of the few things we have that's old. Over there, they got so much bloody stuff. It's like, and they're a poor country and they need space. And I understand why progress has to move on. They can't save everything. And the tourists didn't go to the Islamic areas. They went to see Giza and Saqqara and the pyramids, which are absolutely amazing. But there's so much architecture post-Pharaonic that was destroyed in Cairo merely because it's the largest city in Africa, and people got to live somewhere.
One question that I had in the back of my mind while you were talking about it, it's also different times. So probably you were one of the few people, or there was of course other foreigners living in Cairo, but it's not as common as it is nowadays that you will go everywhere and there is always an expat community or a bunch of international people living there that are relatively connected to one each other due to technology, Facebook, and all of this again. No, how was it for you, like being there, probably being the only, I don't know, white person around, American probably? Did you feel that the
I
being
didn't
different?
feel, I've never felt endangered in all those countries I've been to, which, knock on wood, is again, the people took care of you and they're happy to see you there and they got their own things to do. There was an expat community even then, but unlike some other places, Egypt is a tough place to live. It's poor, it's dirty. There is the Islamic, the fundamentalist thing that rears its head, particularly south of Cairo. You got to be a little careful. That again, I've never had any problems, but it is not an easy, user-friendly city. So it doesn't have the expat community of say Goa or someplace where people go and they find Sri Lanka and return. They find not Sri Lanka. They find what do you call it? What's the classic place? Anyways, cut that bit out. Not Sri Lanka. Shangri-La. But they find Shangri-La, they never return.
Yeah,
exactly. So Cairo's a tough place. And I saw that too. And I guess maybe because it was one of my first experiences outside of Western Europe, it toughened me up a bit. I'm used to kind of gritty, tough, in-your-face cities. And I kind of like, the rawness and the ruggedness of it. So I fit in pretty well, but the people themselves are still very modest and very wonderful. The Egyptians have a great sense of humor, and they're very quick to not compare you to your government and what's happening. And this is right after the first war, the first of the Gulf War. No one blamed me, even if they blamed Bush or other people. They respected you as you are. I mean, how could they not? They were one of the oldest cultures in the world. They've seen Ramsey the Greats come and go. So they're used to seeing all these powerful people ride roughshod over them. We're just little people with little pawns who are living in somebody else's yard. And that's what I've always liked about the Egyptian culture. There's a modesty and a quick sense of humor and effacement where they are quick to laugh at themselves and not have delusions of grandeur. And maybe all cultures, once they've reached their peak and collapsed, I don't know, maybe once you're a dim reflection of what you did in the past, maybe that changed the psyche, the national psyche. I don't know. America may be going into that moment now. So ask me again in a few years and I can tell you.
So basically you've been back and forward until when you were like coming back and forward from Egypt. Like, are you still traveling to Egypt nowadays? Or it's
yeah. After I made the Saving the Sphinx, I made 3 or 4 films there. I lived there for a while, got a place in a area called Zamalek, which is an island right in the middle of the Nile in Cairo, which is the artsy area where the expats go. a little more open, a little more Western. I'm gay, so being gay, certainly wasn't out or didn't. I mean, I was out at home, but I wasn't there. It was a safer space where you knew you could trust people a bit more.
Mm.
A lot of repression, homosexual repression. They're not against me, more against themselves. So Zamalek was kind of a safe place for where the Westerners and the expats lived. It still is.
Okay.
So I made 3 or 4 films there. And then eventually I became a network executive, both first for National Geographic and then for Discovery Channel.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the person who would send crews there, and I would go for big digs, almost all ancient Egypt. So
Okay.
I think the last time I was there was 2 years ago. I did a trio of specials for Discovery Channel on the 100th anniversary of King Tut's discovery. It was found in November of 22. So we made 3 shows in 2022 that aired on the anniversary, and I went over and I, as a network executive, I poked my nose in other people's business and watched the shoots unfold, and then made the deals with the archaeologists and the antiquities people, which is a lot of backsheesh, a lot of greasing of palms. So my experience of Cairo and Egypt has shifted a lot because I do business there now, and I kind of know antiquities people, and I know the camera people and the sound people and how to get the permits. And I've been to Giza a dozen times, and Saqqara and Cairo, or Valley of the Kings. I don't know how many times I've been there, a couple dozen. I just love those places. So I know my way around. So I also have friends and colleagues and experts and filmmakers that I can call when I get there, both for work and for pleasure.
Cool. Very nice. I don't know, like, it's incredible. It's a lot of stories, and it's just like, I don't know from where to go, like, a little bit, but actually you touched the point that I also wanted to ask you about, and it's the whole being gay in Egypt. I'm sure it was not easy. As you said, you were not out at that point of time, but do you remember any story or any moment that you say, okay, or has it changed during the years also, like this? Have you felt that it started
Unfortunately not.
opening?
It's
Or
still pretty repressive over there, but it's always tougher in these places. It's not just Cairo or Egypt. It's Turkey, certainly Syria and Jordan. I've been back to Iran in a long time because it's not safe. But the repression is more on the local people than us. Now, they still try to entrap you. Like, you wouldn't want to use the gay apps when you're in those places because it could be entrapment of people, mostly to entrap locals for shakedown of money and that kind of thing. But I do remember I was out when I went there, and I think if I talked to a few people in the business, I told them, but I certainly didn't share with people. But yet I was hit on all the time when I was traveling through Luxor and through small Antalya, Turkey. And a lot of older men, very crude things in the park. They would do, things. Basically, they were saying, let's go behind a tree and do it. And at first, I was like, why me? And what, do I look that gay? And then I realized, no, I'm a Westerner, so therefore we're decadent already. And I leave in a week. I'm traveling. I'm male. I'm leaving a week, and so there's no
risk
residue for that. No risk. I'm out of here in 2 weeks. They can't pick up somebody at the mosque, but they can pick up this American who's only here for a week doing a film or just wandering around Turkey on their run. So a lot of people, would kind of do those kind of things. And it points to their own repression. And that's what made me feel really sad. Where so many of these people just looking for love, they're looking for release, but they have to do it so surreptitiously and in such a sort of like vulgar and crude way, where I wonder if any of them have ever found love, because I don't know where you would back then in a small town. So, the repression is there, and it was real and probably still is. I still don't, when I go there, certainly the people I work with in Cairo and elsewhere know that I'm gay, but I don't advertise it. My husband has been with me a few times, but we always just kind of treat it with respect as anybody would, with no heavy petting or kissing, on the tram and that kind of stuff. And that's just out of respect for the culture.
Makes sense. When does Turkey comes in this whole equation? Because you said to me before that you lived also sometime in Turkey, and you were there for some time.
I started making those films. One of the people I met at film school was a cameraman, still a good friend of mine and still a cameraman from Turkey, from Istanbul. And he always wanted to do some documentaries about some sites there, Ephesus and Troy and places like that. So we went over together. We made a few films that we sold. And he lives there in a small place. I was just there 2 months ago writing my new novel, a place called Dacia, which is down south in the Aegean. And I rent a little place nearby. And so I spent a lot of time with him. And then eventually I rented a room there when I was working on my films, because that's what we're shooting. And if you do archaeology work, you don't, and if you're doing it independently, you need time to shoot it. It's not like you're going over to somewhere and getting an interview, a sit-down interview. You have to see stuff happening. So you need to be there a lot, and you need to be shooting a lot. You need to be on location. So I would spend weeks and weeks and weeks at archaeological digs in Ephesus and such, hoping for them to find something. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. So that's how I really got to know Turkey. And Turkey, a little more Western than Egypt was. My husband and I talked about where we would retire, and Turkey is certainly on the list. Even though it is Islamic and we don't know what it's like to be an Asian gay couple there, no problems with the locals, but I do love that Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey definitely feels much more Western thinking than it does Egypt, which definitely feels African and Arab, and just a little rougher. The religion and the repression, I suppose, for lack of a better word, looms larger in Egypt than it does in Turkey.
Can't imagine. Never been to Egypt, unfortunately, but my girlfriend actually worked there for some time.
You're in Athens, right?
Yeah. I mean,
2-hour ride.
It's the next trip for sure. Like I actually already give it to her as a present, so I need to do it. It's already set in stone, but we'll see when it will happen. Although it's one
when
of
you
my.
Get close, I'll give you some tips.
Definitely, I will write to you for sure.
Okay,
maybe. Maybe just before we jump to the second part, although we've been entering a little bit back and then on filmmaking, and now that you're writing novels, I would like you to ask a little bit of like already, maybe as a pre introduction to recommendations to Cairo and Egypt for myself, but also for all the listeners. Do you remember any specific local tradition or practices in Egypt that you'd like? I don't know, that left some impression on you, like.
And it was culture, and certainly, Cairo is a very different place. If you go outside of Cairo, you get into the countryside very quickly, and that's where a lot of the ruins are. Abydos and places like that are wonderful. It's changed so much that a lot of that old world Arab culture has disappeared. But what I do remember learning from Egypt is just the sense of patience. The culture is a culture of patience. Things don't happen very quickly. So when you want to buy something at the market, at the souk, make sure you have time to sit there and have coffee and talk to people. You'll eventually get your deal out. But I love that sense of slow pace they have there. Even in a place as crazy as Cairo, there's a sense that I recognize as a Westerner, it's hard to break, this impatience. And all of the Middle East is like that, where even if you're frustrated about the lack of progress, that is just how things happen. It's the lassitude of the heat. It is the chance they have very much else to do other than sell their T-shirts or whatever else they're doing. But there's joy in that waiting. There's joy in just those quiet moments, which sounds a bit corny. It sounds like it's a Hallmark card. But it is true, where some of the best experience I had, like those chickpea farmers I'm talking to waiting for a bus, they come out of not being anxious, which is really, really hard as a Westerner to do because we want shit done 2 minutes ago. And I think I have learned a lot about that part of myself by spending so much time in the Middle East and in Egypt, is that things happen at a different pace. And that's part of the joy, because you're sitting there having tea in a cafe for a while, playing backgammon, and that's where people get to shine. That's where they get to know each other. So I don't know if I guess it certainly is cultural, but it's not like it's a must-do kind of thing. If you're talking about these are the places you go, I can certainly give you that list too. But Egypt is a place where it's been around for 4,000 years. What's the rush?
Yeah, not going anywhere. No? I actually have, when you talk about these kind of things, it feels very close to Athens in certain ways of doing things, and it's just like
Mediterranean culture. Yeah, Mediterranean culture is very similar.
Yeah, I'm originally from Barcelona, and I think a city like Barcelona, although it's Mediterranean, it arrived to this point of stress and needing to rush things, and everything is like and everything needs to happen now, and to be honest, Athens has this piece of like, I don't know, a lot of people, a lot of expats that I interviewed here in the podcast, one of the things that they say about Athens is that you sit down for a coffee and you can be with the same coffee for 4 hours. And this doesn't happen anywhere else in Europe. Would any restaurant or coffee allow you to be 4 hours sitting in the same chair with a single coffee?
Athens is, all of Greece, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it has a lot of eyes towards Eastern Mediterranean and the Mideast, as much so as it does Western Europe. Even though they're part of that world, they're part of Europe. That sense of ancient culture and that sense of time going slowly, it still has a grip on Greece, where it even doesn't, even in Italy, I say, or certainly in Spain. It still exists. I think Mediterranean culture, people go slow because it gets 120 friggin' degrees out, and who wants to rush anywhere in August? So, part of it is just your body can't do it.
Absolutely. What about music? Are you a music person? Do you have any recommendations?
I do love. I wouldn't be the big recommender of that because I do love the world music, the world culture, but I'm not someone who collects it greatly. Certainly on my first trip, like so many first timers in Egypt, I got into Kulthum and all the great classic stuff, which is the classic stuff. But when I was in college, I was always into the music that blended East and West, like Dead Can Dance or Fateh Ali Khan and that kind of stuff, where they kind of took the Western and the Eastern and they strung them together. So I still go to those concerts when I can and I see it. But I'm funny. I'm not a big person who seeks out the music when I go. If I hear something in a record store, I may write it down and seek it later. But
nice. Maybe the last question, and that is something that we all do. So eating and drinking. What is your favorite Egyptian food? I know it's a very difficult question because there is probably a lot.
Anything. I love that. They do their olive oil so well, and their meat, their grilled meat, like turkey does, and that kind of stuff. I love their fool, the beans. I could eat that all the time. So I'm a big bean guy, and they make the best beans because they have the right amount of sesame oil and the right amount of hummus and cumin and stuff. So I love when I go to Egypt. I always go to the marketplace, Kana Kali, which is a touristy one, but you can still get really good deals there in Cairo. And I get the spices. I bring home saffron, and I bring home really good cinnamon and cardamom and those kind of things because they are richer and stronger there. So when I think of Egypt, I think of the spices that go on. But it's otherwise pretty common food: grilled meat, kebabs, hummus and baba ganoush, and fresh baked pita. Nothing's better than I did a documentary years ago where they found a bakery from Pharaonic times at the feet of the Sphinx, and they were still able to get them going, and they were to make pita bread. So I remember one of the greatest experiences was eating pita, eating regular bread from a kiln, from an oven that was from the Old Kingdom period, 4,000 years old. So a lot of it is just where you're eating it. You know what it's like when you eat and drink? It's like, it's wonderful there because you're in that environment, and you come home and you say, oh, I couldn't eat or drink this anymore.
Yes, it happens. I don't know if it's always like that. I don't know how to cook it the proper way, or I'm not in the correct environment of doing that. And that's also like, sometimes I'm just like,
sometimes we mucked it up. I remember taking a cooking class in like Thailand or something, and I came back and I tried my own pad thai, and it was a piece of shit. I never tried again. But even drink, you think ouzo is great when you're sitting there in Greece, but I don't drink it when I come home. It's something about looking at an ancient Greek ruin, and ouzo is wonderful. But I don't pull that out in a bar in Brooklyn where I live now. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't taste right.
No. Well, it barely fits here sometimes also. So when you have it too much, you also start saying, okay, it's a hardcore one. Let's say dangerous. Absolutely dangerous. Very nice. I would say like we jump directly to the second part of the conversation, because if you had already super interesting stories while you were living in Egypt and doing, I'm super curious about knowing a little bit more about your home filmmaking and the whole passion, and now the novels that you're writing also. So I'm definitely interested in that. Hey there, everyone. If you're loving this episode so far and you want to stay tuned with other expat experiences, make sure to hit the subscribe button and follow our podcast so you never miss an episode.
The Expat Filmmaker and Novelist.
Actually, you already said you started as a documentary filmmaker. You studied for it, but now you are kind of transitioning to writing novels. It's a pretty recent change, or when did that happen?
Yeah, it had 2 novels out, and I came to it. I think I didn't after you do anything for so long. I still love television. I'm still in it. That the business has changed exponentially. Um, but after I don't know 1,000 hours of television, I remember going back to some of these places over and over, and I kind of wish I could see Angkor Wat and Machu Picchu and the pyramids when they were new. I got tired of looking at ruins, clambering over bleached stones in the desert or in the jungle and trying to get excited about the broken pillar. So of course I always started after a while. I love to tell stories about what it looked like back in the day. Of course, you can't do it as a documentary filmmaker. So I always had an idea of stories I wanted to tell that would take people back. And of course, that means fiction. Now, fiction was always sort of a big negative word for a documentary filmmaker. It's all about, when you work for National Geographic, it's all about footnotes and buttoning it up. It's not for us to editorialize what life in ancient Egypt was like. But to me, two things happened. It happened fairly recently. In 2016 is when I started writing my first book. And I remember that year because two things happened that got me off the pot and said, write a book. One was I turned 50. Which is a milestone when you think about it. It doesn't mean that your career's over, but certainly recognize, oh, well, I've been doing this for a while and I'm 50. And if I have some bucket list thing I want to do, I better start doing it. And the other thing that happened was my great muse, my great creative artist died that year. Talk about music. It was David Bowie. I've always been a huge Bowie fan since I was a kid. I grew up with Bowie, heard the first album like the late 70s, and I'd be the guy that would buy the first Bowie album every time it came out. And he died. He died in 2016. I'm still not convinced he's dead. He's too cool for that. But rumor is he's still dead. But I mention that because if you know anything about Bowie, he's all about change. And he made 27 albums, and every album was different. Every album, he fiercely pushed himself. And even if he failed, he got back on, and he went from R&B to industrial to jazz to glam rock, and he was always reinventing himself. He wasn't afraid to try something different. And while I knew this instinctively by buying his albums, it wasn't until I looked at his obituary and said, my God, this guy in so few years, look how many things he did and how many times he took a risk. And I remember thinking, if David Bowie could do it 27 times, Neil Laird can do it once. I can take one risk. So I decided, what the hell? I'm going to write my bloody book, and I did. And I wrote the book. And after trial and error, I realized the old adage, write what you know. It's a cliche, but there is some truth in it. So I started writing a book about ancient Egypt. It all took place in ancient Egypt. It just wasn't clicking right. It just felt a bit too researchy, or my documentary roots were coming out. So I decided, why don't I tell a story about a TV film crew like I am, and talk about all what I know about the satire of television and all the cynicism and all the tricks of the trade, and make them go in the past. So the books that I have are a time travel comedic stories about a film crew that travels in the ancient past to win an Emmy, theoretically to win their big award. So all the characters that I know, from the cheesy host to the camera woman to the Egyptian sound guy who's tired of all the Western intervention, they became my characters, and my books take them into the ancient past. So I can have the modern sensibility, but I can still have my cake and eat it too. I can have a film crew and talk about me, but now the book that comes out, by this point it's already out, Primetime Pompeii, is about the film crew going back on the eve of Pompeii to tell a story. Okay. And they get there too late and they find out, oh shit, our time is wrong. We have to get out of here. How the hell do we get out of here again? So it's an action adventure, but it's about a modern day film crew in 79 AD. And that opened up so much of my sense of humor because I can tell the research. I researched deeply about what Pompeii's explosion was like, down to the hour, from the younger, and I know all that stuff. but it's also a comedic romp about a cheesy TV host standing in front of Vesuvius with a drone going over, trying to get the perfect shot of the explosion, so we can still go back and win that BAFTA and that Emmy. So I brought my two worlds together, and it was a perfect timing for it because I've had such joy doing it. I'm getting a nice audience on Amazon where the books are sold, and a lot of people are attracted to it. And the key thing is I made the characters gay. The lead character, Jared, who's a cameraman, he comes out in Egypt. And the first book takes place in ancient Egypt. They go through the 12 hours of the Duat, the underworld, to tell a film. And he confronts his own sexuality. And then the camera woman, Kara, his best friend, a black lesbian from the Bronx, she has a chance to fall in love with a woman in the second book. So I'm always focusing on gay characters of the ancient past. Because one thing I learned when I was shooting these films and traveling is that homosexuality was much more embraced then than it is now. There's a wonderful place in Cairo, in Saqqara, called the Tomb of the Brothers. And they become characters in my book. They're the ones who have the portal that allow people to go back. So I'm using real life people as my sort of comedic characters. The Tomb of the Brothers is this wonderful place. If you go, I'll definitely tell you to get there. And it's in the step of the Saqqara, the step pyramid, Saqqara. It's the oldest pyramid.
Yeah.
It's a very, very elite necropolis from the 4th dynasty, which is 4,500 years ago. So if you were buried there, you had to be the creme de la creme. The pharaoh had to approve you to be buried on the richest real estate for your tomb. And there's a tomb there called the Tomb of the Two Brothers, which we'll laugh at in a minute when you find out what it really is. And you go into it today, and it clearly is two gay men who went off in eternity together. Because there's all these frescoes of them touching nose to nose, was the Egyptian form of kissing, of them on boats together, holding hands, watching the lily pads go by. These are two lovers who not only were buried together, but they were allowed to be buried together by the pharaoh, which means that it was okay to be gay in that period. These guys were hiding anything. It was only when the tomb was rediscovered in 1965 where homophobic archaeologists called it the Tomb of the Two Brothers, because it couldn't possibly be two lovers.
Yeah.
Some guy even said they were Siamese twins, and that's why they were nose to nose. They couldn't look away from one another. It's modern day homophobia. So it also underscores the fact that in many ways times were better back then than they are now. So these two characters became they're recurring characters in my primetime book series, because they're the ones who allow Jared to tell his gay stories. You can go in the back in Pompeii, but I want you to find at least one positive gay character and talk about it. So I'm also normalizing same-sex relationship books, as well as giving you an Indiana Jones-like adventure.
I really love that you're capable of like jumping from one to the other and still give it like, and being the capable of have the capacity of saying, oh, I'm writing something, but I'm doing it. Oh shit! Take this step backwards to say, oh, it's too documentary, and being yourself, who are telling yourself like, no, I don't want this to be a documentary. I want to be a fiction, and you actually say it. No, actually, I assume like being a documentary filmmaker for so many years has marked you in a lot of ways, and inside of the documentary, you cannot give that much of room to imagination and creativity outside of what it should be real, no? Like, maybe taking a step backwards before the novels again, I wanted to ask you what is the day life of a producer or a documentary filmmaker of doing documentaries for National Geographic, for Discovery, you work for BBC, you work for a lot of the big networks. What is the day life? Because everyone sees the result of it, but nobody sees the work behind camera, no?
I mean, there's a lot of behind the scenes, and of course, funny. I'm doing lectures. I just did a cruise lecture where one of the was called "Confessions of a TV Producer," and all I did was tell 10 stories about behind the scenes of what you don't see on camera, and people loved it because they're always curious about how you patch it together. And it's not easy. Some are smooth, some are difficult. I've gotten dysentery in 3 countries. I've been chased by a bear. I was arrested in Spain by the Guardia Civil. None of that shit makes it on camera. That's the stuff behind the scenes. So lots of stuff I can kind of bring into my book. And it's definitely a very privileged career, but people always say, "Oh, I'd love to carry your suitcase and come along." It's friggin' work. Because in most cases, you only have a short amount of time because of the budget, a very expensive crew. You have to get in, get out, and get your story. You got to make everybody happy. As a producer or showrunner that I am, you're working. You might be in Machu Picchu for 3 days telling a story, but you are dealing with all the headaches. Oh, it's raining now, and we have to fly home tomorrow, and the expert wants extra money at the last minute. Remember, I was shooting in Edinburgh in Scotland, in Western Europe, and years ago about Roslyn Chapel, which is a lovely little strange site up there. And I spent this all day with this expert who showed me all around. And then you have to get them to sign their release form, which means we can use you. Without it, you can't do it. And he refused to do it until I gave him £20,000. He didn't tell me that before I flew over. And I'm calling back National Geographic and says, we have a problem. We have spent 4 days interviewing this guy who gave me amazing footage, and now he's bribing me. They said, pay it because we need that footage. So all those headaches come up. You are on the job a lot of the times. But again, people are opening tombs for you that you wouldn't see. I climbed to the top of the Sphinx, which no one's allowed to do. You definitely have these great privileges when you are making films because it opens doors. But it ain't a holiday, which is why I still take my holidays with my husband and my friends, because it's nice not to have a camera in my hand.
I can imagine.
I take no photos. I don't even put my phone up when I'm on a holiday. No freaking way, because I'm off the clock.
I can imagine. I mean, it has marked you for sure. Like, it is a lot of work of doing production, but also like recording the whole preparation, getting the things done. And yeah. I sometimes feel like producers and the people who are around, no, everyone knows who are the famous actors. Everyone knows who, even the famous directors sometimes. But even you've been nominated multiple times for Emmy. And you need to be really passionate to be doing the background work of all these filmings. And because come on, I have a podcast. I'm sitting here home. I don't have a big deal of but it's still work. It's a lot of work. I cannot imagine what it means. Big productions like going to Egypt or to Machu Picchu or to whatever. It doesn't really matter, even if it's like in next home, but you need to contact experts. You need to get in touch with local people. You need to do everything. And there is not that much recognition from the audience to the work that you do.
There's not. It's pure anonymity for a TV producer, Yeah. And, we make a far less than a feature film, and no one knows Neil Laird's name unless you Google him on IMDb or whatever. But, it's not like you become famous doing this. Because I'm not in front of the camera, behind the camera. And keep in mind, too, let's say I shoot a 2-hour special about King Tut's tomb or Machu Picchu. That's 10, 12 days in the field, another 9 months of pre-production and post-production making it. So the production part is a very small slice of the pie. People think all you do go over, you make it, and then it airs. You have to do a month or two of pre-production, lining things up, and then you're in the edit for a minute, and then you're cutting it, getting network notes, shaping it. I love storytelling, so I like that part as well and researching. But it is not all just about being in the field. That is 1 week out of 9 months.
No, I get it. That part is the part that I get it, because we are recording here, and this episode will go live 3 months afterwards, and it's in a small podcast. I cannot imagine doing the pre-production of the documentaries that you've been in. That must be insane. I would love it, but at the same time, it must be insane. You actually touch a point that I also want to.
You have help. It's not one person, but.
Of course. It's not a one-man show, which is the difference. Also, that's why I take 3 months to edit episodes, because I'm the one-man show.
So you.
I actually wanted to ask you about the storytelling part, actually, and how do you find the whole? Because you actually touch something that it's probably that you have something inside. Calling to discover new stories and discover new things and discover everything. But how is the process of storytelling in there? Like, who comes first? Like, does the network come to you and say, I want to do this episode? Or it's the other way around, that you have something in the back of your mind and you push it to the network?
It's both. In a lot of production companies, because given the networks in most cases don't make the shows, they buy them with the buyer, and the seller is
Okay.
the one who
Yeah.
make them. And I've worked on both sides of it. I'm back in production now, so I just got off a phone call just before you talking about pitching a project about the Nabateans in Saudi Arabia, with the Saudi Arabian
Hmm.
producer. So we're trying to shape that idea that then I will take it to the networks on their behalf because I know the people there. And then sometimes they say yes. Usually they say no. And then in the additional times, and I was the network side, we say, well, we know we need a show. Something rates really well. Civil War is rating really well. Let's go a Civil War show. And we develop the idea internally, and then we go to the production companies we think will do a nice job. They have a relationship
Hmm.
with. So it happens both ways. But usually it comes from outside because the networks rely on the production houses to come up with the ideas and the exclusivity and all that stuff. If you came to me and says, I can get you in the Parthenon because I know all these Greek people that are working up there and I have an exclusive, then I'd take your meeting. So a lot of it's about what you have to offer the network that allows you to be the one that we would choose to make that film, because you get pitched all the time. There's no story that's new. There's no
I see.
story I haven't pitched that I haven't heard 100 times. But it's a question of, well, you have this actor, or you have this exclusivity, or you're going to open this tomb, or whatever it is. That what gets you in the door, and that takes
That's
time.
some.
That's that pre-production.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Also, getting everything ready to be the best beat
Yeah,
in the basket. No, let's say like this.
exactly.
How much of this world is context? Because it's everyone has a camera nowadays, no? So everyone can start their own productions and
Yeah,
everything, but
exactly.
um, not everyone has the right context to get, as you said, inside of the partner, for example. No.
Exactly. You need the relationships, and you know how to tell stories too. It's harder for a production company, a new production company doesn't have experience already making shows for the networks, to get in the door, because the
Mm.
way we tell stories is very unique. It's not like you come back with a bunch of footage and you sling it together, and Discovery and Geographic and BBC, we all have a different storytelling ways. So we often rely on people that have already told those stories for us before because it's quicker. So having idea and having exclusivity or the connection is only part of it. You have to understand how to tell a story for
Mm.
American or UK or European television, whatever, whoever it is. And that's a big hurdle. Not everybody can do it well.
Oh, it's a skill. It's not something that you you develop
Yeah,
from one day to the other, probably.
yeah. Some do it
Maybe
better than others. Yeah,
going back, yeah, for sure. Maybe going back a little bit to the novel and talking a little bit more. I'm curious also about the fictional part of it. You already said that you actually went a step back when you were starting to write it, to say, okay, this is maybe too much footnote and too much historically accuracy when you wanted to write a fiction. Does it happen the other way around also? How much creative license are you giving to yourself when it comes to, I don't know, you said the second novel happens in Pompeii, but do you try to be historically accurate also on the
it's a good question. And again, it's a different. One thing I gotta say very quickly is, when you, like anything else, we're talking about making films, writing a novel. If I knew how hard it was going to be, I may not have done it. If I would naively, because I said new language.
Mm,
I was writing like a screenplay, and I was writing like a feature or a treatment, and that's not what literary fiction is. That's not what stories are. So I had to teach myself a new language and how to tell a story with internal thinking and all the stuff that you expect in a novel, driven by character, not by fact. So that took me a while to find that sweet spot. But one of the things that I think I bring to both Primetime Travelers, the Egypt book, and Primetime Pompeii,
mm,
and then Primetime Troy that I'm writing now, and they go back to ancient Troy, is that I know and I love those worlds. So you can bet, when you buy Primetime Pompeii or Primetime Troy, that I have done my research. And even though it's a comedic and adventure story, it's not all comedy, but you can bet that how Pompeii explodes and what happens, Neil Laird has done his research. So
mm,
I create characters. My characters are fictional, but I try to paint a picture of the ancient world as much as I can. Of course, it's fantasy because none of us have been there. But when I have them walking down into Pompeii for the first time after they get out of their time machine or time portal, I am writing about what I think those places look like. When I wrote Pompeii, I rented a villa for a month in
mm.
Sorrento. And every day I would go to Pompeii and I would walk around in the morning and take notes. And then I'd go back to my villa, and that's how I wrote. I was just in Turkey in
Cool.
a villa not far from Troy, the ruins of Troy, and the same thing. I'm talking to the experts. I would go around. I would try to do as much research as I could, read all the books. I listened to the Iliad and the Odyssey all the way through in the evening over wine. I love getting into that research. So when I sit down and create the fantasy, I have the facts in my hand and I write to the facts as much as I can.
Very
And that's
nice.
kind of a fun way to do it, because I think that's why my two worlds have blended so well, I think. Because I always wanted to tell stories in a different way, but I'm still using the verisimilitude of what a filmmaker has to do to tell a documentary in what is otherwise a fantasy.
Cool. I mean, I need to buy the books. That's for sure. The second part is that I really like that you're blending words and blending things that you know well, and there it's um, something that I'm always also curious about. It's like, of course, like you said about the two brothers tomb, the historical characters, for sure you've taken some of them and include them in the novels. How much of the filming crew and the main characters of the story are also inspired by real people around?
Quite a lot of them, but they're an amalgamation. I don't think any one person can sue me, because there's no one person that is the camera woman or the host. But certainly all the people I've worked with will recognize, oh, there's a bit of me in that, there's a bit of me in that. And it's a 4-person crew, a sound person, Indiana Jones, kind of a cheesy host who finally comes into his own. Jared, which is very much me as a young kid, and then Kara, his best friend, camera woman. And my friends and my enemies, I love if I look at it and say, oh yeah, I see where you got that idea. So yeah, and the television executives, the opening scene of Pompeii, the new book, takes place. They're watching the first film in a network executive boardroom, and all the people I dealt with from ad sales and advertising and marketing and all the ugly bits are there to comment on it. So I'm using my time as a network executive to kind of bring into how they see television and how they see the world and how they see history. So it's fun to be able to skewer that stuff, but then also tell a story that I can totally make up. Like the impetus of Pompeii, I knew I needed a new hook for it. And again, I wanted to tell a gay story. And you've been to Pompeii, right?
Yeah, multiple
Yeah,
times.
I've mentioned you have. I mean, if you know about if you go to Pompeii, you know about all the plaster casts of the victims there. And if
Yeah,
you go to one of the main gates, the amphitheater gate, behind the glass in the gift shop, which seems a rather rude place to put them, are the victims of maybe a dozen of the people who didn't make it to the marina in time and get out. And there's one group, 2 people, not unlike the Tomb of the Two Brothers, that has a misnomer. They were long called the Two Maidens. And it's 2 people in embrace. I don't know if you've seen them. There's one on
yeah,
the head of the chest of the
yeah.
other, and they're being held. And they long thought it was a mother and a child. And it was only CAT scan and DNA tests in the last 5-10 years they realized that they were both male, they were not related, and they're between 20
Okay.
and 30 years old. So we don't know if these was a gay couple, but to me, as a fiction story, now as a fiction guy, not a documentary, I can make them a gay couple. So Jared's main reason of going back to Pompeii and telling the story is to find out the identity of who these 2 men are, how they died, why they died, and what was their name. They want us to give life to these 2 unsung same-sex couple. So that's all fantasy. And I'm quick to say there's no guarantee. Just because they're embraced, it could have been a shopkeeper and a metal worker who just realized the end was near and they held each other tight. But if you look at those, and now I'm talking subjective, when I look at those plaster casts, I don't see 2 strangers. I see 2 people in love that are going out together at that last moment when that pyroclastic flow catches up with them and melts their bodies. They held each other tight. And that is the grain, or that is the impetus of the second book. Who are these embracing lovers? And that got me going. Once I came up with that, then the fantasy and the archaeological work went there, and I talked to the experts who dug, and I filled in all the stuff on top of what is otherwise a fantastical story.
Nice. Very cool. What is the next steps on the series? You already said that so you released 2 of them. You're working on the Trojan one. Is that the
Mhm.
last one, or are you planning to continue doing
No,
series of everything?
look, I mean, television term is returnable. This crew the film crew, as long as they have their door to travel, they can keep going back over and over again. I'll see how they sell. You know, the first book, Primetime Travelers, came out in May, and that's on Amazon.
Mm.
And that's about them going back to ancient Egypt. That's sort of the origin story. And then Pompeii is in November. Troy comes out next year. I could do the Crusades. I could do China. I don't know yet. You know, I think at some point I may be eager to do another story, tell a different something else that's not them. But I love these characters. I know these characters so well. And I think people relate to them because they're us. And the tricky thing about historical fiction sometimes, particularly if you go in the ancient past, it's hard to see us in the Egyptians.
Mm.
It's hard to see us in the ancient Greeks. You know, I was just watching again just a few nights ago because I'm still so deep in research. I'm watching the film version of Troy, you know, the Brad Pitt thing, which I knew
Yeah.
was not a good film. And then watching again, I realized why that film doesn't work. Besides seeing Brad Pitt all buffed out, is the characters. Even though we know Menelaus and Odysseus and Achilles and Priam, they didn't bring life to them. They didn't make them full-fledged characters. They made them
Mm.
they kept them historical figures.
Mm.
So while we know Achilles is going to die when Patroclus is killed, and we know all this stuff's going to happen, Hector's going to be dragged around the walls. The filmmaker's fault was they didn't make them real characters. They didn't make us characters that we believe are flesh and blood.
Mm.
And I think by having characters that time hop and having characters that are very much us, that live in Brooklyn and go to the same cafes that I go, and take them in the past, it makes them a lot more relatable in many regards. So I think a lot of readers are reacting to the fact that they see themselves in Kara and Derek and Jared, the lead characters, where it's harder to see themselves in Achilles and Patroclus
Mm.
because they're icons.
Yeah, they are this figure of demigod, kind of. Although they are not
Yeah,
demigods, but
literally.
yeah. It's the illusion of like who are these people, and they are so many so many times told their story that okay, you know most of what is going to
Know
happen
it too
also.
well.
So
Right.
yeah, maybe the only thing, I mean, it's good because you find the kind of way of like you could history, it's everywhere, so in every corner of the world you could write a book about. Probably the only problem would be TV, and then you would need to switch to a YouTube crew or something. I don't know if the television crew is it's probably the thing that will die the soonest in the whole story.
Young kids might say, "What's the TV crew?"
There is already kids who doesn't know what the TV crew is, so that's for sure. Like,
I'm already showing my age. I'm already writing ancient fiction, even when I'm in the present day. You don't need a
so
four-person crew or a
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, it's changing so much. Also, the formats. Are
yeah.
you still working though? Like, you're doing writing novel, and then at the same time you're still writing,
Yeah.
doing.
I mean, novel writing is not enough to pay all the bills right now, so I'm doing a History Channel project right now, and then I'm developing projects with friends, mostly the Middle East and Egypt and archaeology, mostly history, ancient history. That's sort of been my bailiwick. But then I've done freelance, and I did a series this summer for a friend who has a show on History Channel called Food That Built America, and it's about the rise of popular foods in the 20th century. It's a show.
Okay.
So, I'll do that too, because, once you understand storytelling for TV, it doesn't all have to be history. I've done weight loss shows, and I've done engineering shows and all manner of stuff over the years. So while I'm known for the adventure, archaeology, mystery stuff, it's fun to write a show about the rise of 7-Eleven. I did one about the rise of the Xerox machine versus IBM. It's kind of cool. It's still history and research, 20th century. So, I still have my feet very much in the TV world for as long as it lasts.
Cool. So you're planning to continue writing and doing both. So that's like next for you. It
Inshallah.
would be
Yeah, that's
okay.
the plan, exactly.
Nice.
As long as I can financially afford to do both. And the reason you write the books very quickly and get them out there is you build an audience, and so when book one comes out and you get book two, it takes a while to kind of create a series where people are defined. So hopefully, let's say when Pompeii comes out, it'll convince people to go back and read the first one again, and then I can repackage them as a box set. So it's a lot of marketing, and it's a lot of it's a long run up to start seeing a big profit in novel writing. So another reason why I'm going to keep my day job.
Absolutely. I don't think it's easy to become I mean, you're already succeeding one. If you succeed in two, that's a very
right.
good one.
I'm biting off a lot, aren't I? Right. Rather presumptuous of me.
So maybe the last question before we close the episode, it's what, like, as a person who has done all of these and succeed also a lot, come on, multi Emmy and nominee. That's not easy said. What would be your advice to any aspiring filmmakers or writers who are trying to get their stories out there and trying to go out of the of the comfort zone?
Well, certainly do. I mean, don't read, take your classes if you want, but particularly creative pursuits, you only learn by writing and by making the film. Film school helped me in that I met a lot of people, but it wasn't until I went out and lived, when I started backpacking and found my muses and found my stories and became a little fearless. Go back to David Bowie and don't be afraid to fail. You don't have to be a giant like him, but try it once and see, and talk to the right people, listen to people. And it's remember when I was at Discovery, we had a internship program, and every year interns from schools would come in, and we'd see all these young kids come in for a couple months. And I was shocked at how few people knocked on my door and asked a question like, what are you working on? Can I sit in? Can I go to this meeting? What are you doing? And then one or two people who did say, oh, I really love, I see that you did that thing on on ancient Mesopotamia. Can I just see what a rough cut looks like? Those are the ones that are in the business because they had that curiosity and they were there and they were asking questions. So find those people, look for the mentors and listen and ask questions. Don't assume it's going to happen to you. You have to work for it, but you have to, again, be a little bit out there. You got to throw yourself out of your comfort zone to do it. You're not going to learn how to become a novelist through osmosis or by reading a book on how to be a novelist. You got to write it and fail, and then rewrite it and fail, and rewrite it and fail, rewrite it and fail, and then eventually someone says, "Oh, you finally got it." So doing and asking questions is the one thing I recommend anybody in any career do. And certainly, if you want to travel like you, don't wait until time is perfect in Cairo because it won't be. Book that ticket today.
Nice. Neil, has been an incredible episode. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think the mandatory last question that I need to ask to you is where my listeners can find both your novels, where they can find you, where they can get in contact, even like.
My books are available at Amazon and Kindle. So if you go to Amazon and type in my name, Neil Laird, or all the books have Primetime in the title, Primetime Travelers, Primetime Pompeii, and they will come up. The first two will already be out by the time this airs. NeilLaird.com. The best thing to do, if you're curious, anyone listen to it, join my mailing list at NeilLaird.com, and then I'll send out free copies and short stories, and then you'll know when the books are coming out. And that's the best way to kind of keep in touch with what I'm doing, because part of writing these books is getting the feedback from the people and saying, what did you like about the last book? Who was your favorite character in Pompeii? Where would you like to see them go next time? So I love talking to readers who have actually picked up the book and have something to say.
Cool. Very nice. So as always, for every listener, the links will be in the description of the episode, and you can get the newsletter, follow Neil, and also get books in Amazon Kindle and read and give feedback to Neil. And if you give feedback saying that you come from the episode, do that also. And if you want me to send him, I have direct contact now. Yay. So if you read the books and you have feedback, also get in contact with me. Again, thanks a lot for your time today and for taking the time to explain both your life and your work. It has been a very, very interesting episode.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you for having me. Great discussion.
You've been listening to Expat Experts, the podcast that takes you around the world through the stories of those who've lived it. Subscribe now to YouTube and your favorite podcast platform, and stay tuned for more inspiring interviews.